Cliff Albright, go ahead, jump in, please.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I'm Cliff Albright, co-founder, executive director of Black Voters Matter, and I'm here basically was on an email thread with Mike and bounced around an idea that we've been talking to. Let me take a step back because I'm not sure how many folks on the call are familiar with the work that Black Voters Matter do. We are a power building organization. We focus on building power in predominantly Black communities. We believe that elections and electoral organizing is one way of doing that, but not the only way of doing that. And so the way we go about engaging in our work is that we support local groups. We do work in 23 states, 11 of those where we actually have at least one staff member. Most of those are in the South, and all the way from from Texas, running all the way across over Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, the two Carolinas. And then we have two states up north, one of which you were just talking about in Pennsylvania and one in Michigan. Again, those are our core states where we have staff members. And there's 12 other states where we have a light touch, where we don't have staff, but we support local groups. And when I say support, that means, we support them on strategy, on GOTV, on mobilizing, on advocacy around voting rights. We've got an entire part within our policy sharp that deals with redistricting. That's part of what I'm gonna talk about today. And we don't just focus on the congressional redistricting and those maps that have been drawn. We've been providing support to local groups that have been dealing with their local state and their local redistricting. The previous speaker, a couple of speakers ago, talked about how all roads run through these state legislatures, and we believe that, but we also believe that they run through these county commissions and these city councils, and that those maps are important too. And a lot of local groups don't often get support around that redistricting process because the national dialogue is always at the congressional level. And so we get these groups support, strategy, financial resources. Sometimes we travel around in what we call the Blackest Bus in America to provide some support. And texting and tools and things of that nature. Over the past year, we've been very deeply involved in the battle for voting rights. Somebody talked about the Georgia miracle. We're based in Georgia, and we were very much involved in the Georgia elections, both the presidential as well as the two Senate runoffs that took place in January, the day before the insurrection. And so with all that said, we were active in the battle, and I see you putting up the website. We were active in the battle around the voting rights legislation. We were part of the group that was outside the White House for months doing rallies and protests to get President Biden to finally come out and speak about filibuster reform and to take a clear, unequivocal stance on that. He finally did that. We continue to push along with many other groups, many other partners, some which may even be on this call, but you mentioned the League of Women's Voters earlier, People for the American Way, Transformative Justice Coalition, Legal Defense Fund, so many partners that have been working together, DFAD, Lawyers Committee, Leadership Conference. And, we were part of keeping it on the radar so that the Senate could have the historic debate and take the vote that it took, which obviously fell short. And so that's why I'm here today, because as we're going about and we're talking about redistricting and we're talking about the current election cycle and we're trying to mobilize voters to come out, what we don't want to have to happen is that we don't have an answer to the question when somebody says, well, we did all that in 20 and Georgia folks did that in 21 and got 2 Senate seats. And you said that if we had the Senate, we'd be able to get some good stuff passed like voting rights, but that didn't happen. So why should we do it again? How do we know the same thing won't happen? And we've got to be able to answer that question. So one of the things that we've been floating and talking to partners within the coalition about is coming up with a voting rights contract or a voting rights compact or a voting rights pledge where we basically get anybody running for Congress, particularly the Senate, but maybe the House as well, but particularly the Senate, since we know that's where we need 2 extra votes in order to get voting rights passed. But we come up with this compact, that's a package of 4, maybe 5, maybe even 6 bills that would be pledged to ahead of time, so that when folks come to get our votes, and when they win and go to DC, that they don't wind up going there and then we think that they're there to pass voting rights, but then they say, oh, I never said that. Oh, I never said anything about filibuster reform, right? It's got to be the basis of accountability. So we're thinking about a contract that would have at a minimum the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that would have the Freedom to Vote Act on it, or the For the People Act, because we've been saying that, look, the original ask was the For the People Act. Manchin then came up with the compromise and then had the audacity to betray his own compromise. And so if that's the case, and we're going around him now, that we don't even have to deal with his compromise, we go back to the original ask, which is the For the People Act. And so the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, freedom to vote, or For the People, either one, we'll figure it out. The DC statehood, because we very much believe that DC statehood is a voting rights issue. Filibuster reform, because at the end of the day, all this doesn't mean anything if they promise to support the bills, but they don't support filibuster reform, cinema, then that doesn't get us very far, right? And then a fifth one that we've been talking about, which is lesser known, some of y'all may on here may know it since you've been talking a lot about redistricting, but the Fair Representation Act, we believe that it can be an important contribution to the discussion around voting rights. Some of you may know it deals with federal redistricting, but by changing the nature of how districts are drawn and how people are voted in, proportional representation combined with ranked choice voting. From my personal perspective, it brings me back 30 years ago to when Lonnie Guinier first tried to have a national debate and a national discussion around proportional representation. The entire country would have had a chance to have that debate if Bill Clinton had not withdrawn her nomination and not given her a chance to defend her position in a hearing. Instead, they allowed her to be coined and referred to as a quota queen. That's not what proportional representation is about. Okay. The Fair Representation Act would be a chance to have that discussion. That is still up for some discussion because some people aren't quite as familiar with it. But at the end of the day, it's the notion of having a voting rights contract that we wanted to introduce.
All right, these are all great things. We're really thrilled to have you on, Cliff. If you'll put your contacts in there, we'd like you to join our coalition on gerrymandering at very least, and Black Votes Matters. It's really good to have us in this coalition and on these calls. I hope you'll become a regular. Join us again in 2 weeks, and let's see if we can aim towards a national gathering that includes your group on gerrymandering. Okay, is that cool? Put everything in the chat. Justin, you have a question, and then we're going to move on. It's already 6 o'clock, for God's sakes. We're going to move on with Tatanka and Danny Paul. Cliff, where are you? What city are you in?
I'm based in. We're based in Georgia. We're in Atlanta.
Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. And of course, you work with Ray McClendon and all the people down there. Justin LeBlanc, real quick, please.
Thank you, Cliff, for everything that all you guys have done for that Georgia Way Coalition. That really is a model to the rest of us, along with what was mentioned before, Voting Rights Michigan, formerly Voters Not Politicians. I wanted to give some context that the initiative process that Michigan used in order to get its Citizen Redistricting Commission came out of an episode in Ohio. Way back when, during the labor rights movements, the railroads had actually pretty much beaten down the state government and were going to override rule of law there. And around the country, citizens got fed up and put initiative processes to override their legislatures. That's something that we really need to emphasize in terms of all these Republican attacks on voting rights and all these Republican attacks on the electoral systems that we have, is that our country already went through that process, and we rejected this idea that legislatures have absolute power. The citizens do have their own power. We need to stand up and take it. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Justin. A very strong 2 cents worth, as usual. We're over 80 people on this call right now, for those of you in Radio Land. We want to move ahead now to, thank you again, Cliff. We want to move ahead to Tatanka and Danny Paul.